Tracy, and we are going to be talking about podcasts today. It's a hot topic. It is still a very strong, growing area of brand development and influencer marketing. And some people have been hearing it for a decade now, but I feel like it's stronger than ever. I think there's this whole new fusion between the podcast and the live video happening at the same exact time. I know a bunch of my friends who would do it, and it is highly effective because you're duplicating your content on multiple platforms at one time, which is amazing. So first, I want to give a big shout out to my friend, my client, someone who I've known for 10 years when I originally met you, maybe longer.
Well, we don't really have to do the math, but a good long while.
Right. It's been a while. Professionally, we originally met through an organization called Ladies Who Launch in New York City. And so welcome, Tracy. Give everyone a little bit of a background of your amazing skill set that started in radio many years ago to how we met.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, just a little side note, you'll find that I'm absolutely in love with the whole medium of broadcast radio, anything related, especially podcasting now. Used to sleep with a radio under my pillow when I was 5, listening to ghost stories. So I'm a big believer. I know, right? I'm a big believer in the power of storytelling, and it served me well. The first half of my career was spent in broadcast radio, media management, and I rose to the top of my game there. I couldn't really go anywhere else but own one, so I left and I started my own business development consulting business about 13 years ago, and that's when we met. And the great thing about podcasting and how that weaves into my story is that with the resurgence happening the last few years, I've been able to merge the two things that I love the most, business development strategy and broadcast radio, into what is today's form of radio that's most popular, podcasting. So, yeah.
So it's a bit of a transition coming from traditional radio into podcasts. However, it's somewhat very similar too. There's, you do yours so professionally. You have a producer who's controlling all these different aspects, which I loved. It was an incredible experience for me as a guest. I felt like everything was in control. And there's so many directions we can go into right now about podcasting because it's really evolved. It used to be, this microcosm of a diffusion of radio. And now it's this multimedia integration strategy for many brand owners and influencers. So let's break it down and simplify things real fast for people. What is the most simple way to get started? Just getting started. But before you take it into all the different aspects of marketing and before you make it this mega hit, if you just want to test the waters and see how.
Well, there are a couple of different ways I can answer that. The first one I'll say is before you start anything really, but especially a podcast, is you want to identify your why. Like, why is it that you feel like that you want to start a show? What is it that you want to say? With my company, Producer Podcast, we always ask our customers, the first question is, what are you trying to change the conversation about? Like, are you trying to change the conversation in your industry? Are you trying to change the conversation in a philosophical space, in a passionate space, in a creative fiction place? But podcasting is a great, just fundamental way to have your voice be heard. So we want to identify the why first. And then in terms of like, if you're timid and you're like, well, I'm not certain that I necessarily want to start my own or even know how to start my own, I would recommend finding out if there's another podcast that's in your genre, in your interest level, or in your business category, and be a guest on someone else's show. And then that gives you a really good idea of how it feels, how you like being involved with it, and how you felt behind the mic, so to speak. And so I would just say, and third, I would just say, you just want to start by just claiming that that's what you want to do, and then the ball will happen.
Right. So before I respond to that, I just want to give a shout out to everyone who's on here because we've got a bunch of friends on here.
Oh,
so Nakia gave us a big shout out. We love you too, Nakia. Juliana, coming from the beach, which I'm going to Florida tomorrow, thankfully. So
you'll be near me.
I'm in Orlando though, so I'm not like beach bound, but my girls have a gymnastics competition. Jennifer, huge shout out. James is on with us. Anna, all these entrepreneurs who are all influencers who are constantly building their businesses. So you first mentioned what makes you different, really, and figuring out what's going to separate you. And it really, a lot of people will say, well, there's so many people doing what I'm doing right now, but we all have our unique voice. I'm working on this huge undercover project right now. I'll be able to talk about it a little bit more in probably the next week or two, but it is in the podcast, video, multimedia space, and it's inspirational in context. But when asked what made this project different, basically it was my voice and my background in emotional intelligence and my ability to pull things out of people that other people wouldn't be able to if they didn't understand emotional pathways and triggers and human behavior patterns, right? So it's not just interviewing somebody, but it's interviewing somebody trying to get to the deep layers of the onion in a context of emotional intelligence. So it's really about understanding your unique voice and your unique way of being too, not just having a unique genre, so to speak, but having a unique way of presenting that genre. Wouldn't you say?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Actually, I mean, the thing about it is, and anything, podcasting is really new right now, and it's what considered the wild, wild west. There are tons of space available in the space for sure, but that gap is becoming more narrow. I think the last stats I saw was Apple was they were loading 1,000 new podcasts a week, and there are approximately 500,000 podcasts out there right now. So being a differentiating factor for what you want to communicate is very important. But the thing about it is that nobody can say anything the way that you're going to say it, because you have your life experiences that you're bringing to the table, your own unique voice, in my case, my own unique accent. There are just a lot of things that when you can step into the confidence of being able to open up and speak what it is that you want to speak about, whether it's business or personal or a combination of both, it's going to be your unique message.
Right. And the way that you want it to come out, and also your own unique audience too. Everyone has their own unique audience, which leads me to my next question. For some people who are thinking, I don't really have that big of an audience. How do I get started? So one of the things you said that's really important, and I'm such a believer in, is contribute to other people's platforms, maybe first and foremost, to gain your following. So you can come up with your own pitch strategy. Maybe you have 2 or 3 pitch strategies of getting on someone else's podcast first, and make sure that you have a conversion strategy when you're getting on to drive people to go sign up for your database. So when you launch, and also follow you on your social media. So when you launch your podcast, you have a following in place. So I love that suggestion. But one of the other questions that people are coming up with constantly when I talk about this is, I don't have a following. Who's going to listen to me? And don't I need money for sponsorship? So what's your answer to that?
Wow, that's like that's a lot in one question. So let's break it down. So in terms of audience, yes, being a guest on someone else's podcast is one way. It's, like I said, it's one way to also test the water, so to speak, to see if it's something that you're interested in, that you want to do. Secondarily, when you launch a show, you want to be really clear about the type of show it is that you want. So there are probably one of the most popular formats is to have a single host that interviews guests. And in that capacity, that translates really well to growing a following, because as you accrue guests and they come on your show and you invite them, and there's this idea of exchange of information, not only on the show, but then that you have then that ability to be able to market to their audiences. And we actually create a guest management system that is important, because you can make it easy for someone else to share your show. So I think if you're an actual guinea pig of ours, so we send you all of the information, and not just us, but you can do this on your own, is that making sure you make it easy for the guests to share it by providing the links to the social media, by providing even pre-written social media posts to the person who is on your show, so that you're more guaranteed that they will have it, make it easier for them to put it out there. Sponsorship, now that kind of takes you into a whole different category, because, for example, people think, well, I don't have enough following. How am I going to get a sponsor? And there is a bit of a chicken and egg involved with that. But a real life example of a mompreneur that I spoke to yesterday that's getting ready to launch a podcast, she doesn't have an email newsletter database. She's actually pretty new to her business, but she's been very involved in Facebook groups promoting her business and the launch of her podcast. And she put it out there, would anyone be interested in working with me to help me get it off the ground? And she had several people in her Facebook group say, hey, I'll give you $100 a month. And so that's not the big brand, Tide or Nike sponsorship. No, but you're coming out of the gate with your real loyal evangelists that are willing to step up and support you to get your message out. And I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, just to clarify, those people giving $100 a month, I'm assuming have a business that they want promoted on the podcast as well. Is that correct?
Yes, that's great. Yeah. So, and that can happen in a variety of different ways. So podcasting is a lot like radio in that you can actually have commercials produced that drop into the show itself. Probably the most effective use of advertising or sponsorship in a podcast is just the host themselves endorsing the product. So for example, if you were then to speak about a product, Jen, that you really liked as you opened or closed your show, that's going to have a lot more effect on your listeners because they are tuning in or downloading or listening to you because they like what it is that you have to say and you have a very strong trust factor with them.
Yeah. So Juliana, I'm going to answer your question in just a second. But I want to stay on the sponsorship strategy because I think it's really important because you just offered a micro strategy to people. It's low-hanging fruit. It might not be thousands of dollars off the top, but it at least could be something in contribution. Another strategy, I think, to give back would also be interviewing that person and playing that interview, over and over again on multiple platforms too. Interviewing meaning the company that gave the $100 obviously has a company and a brand, and having an interview with them also gives them a ton of visibility. It's the QVC backyard fence scenario where I'm interviewing you, so I'm bringing you into my home and everyone's looking over the backyard fence at us. So that also gives that credibility as well. But I want to go backwards to one point that you made that was really awesome, where you called it the guest management system. And I loved working with you guys after doing the podcast because you did have everything packaged. And this is so important. My friends and I have an exchange system whenever somebody's launching something or promoting something where we have an open, hey, whatever you need us to support you, shoot an email. But what we ask from my group of friends is that it's already pre-scripted. I can adjust it if need be, but everything's already there. So I can literally copy and paste, add my own personality, but it should only take a few seconds, right? And if I am left to my own, it probably is not going to get posted, or it's going to get posted not necessarily with the same oomph. Not that I'm not passionate or caring about it, but if I have to create this whole dialogue, then it might keep going less and less and lower on my priority list. So the best thing that you can do is give somebody pre-scripted content of how to share.
Right.
Maybe it should always be an image, in my opinion. Images always get the most visibility. An image with some text, and make sure the link is there too, so that people can go there. Juliana asked a really interesting question because we did brush over this quickly in the beginning. What's the difference between a podcast and a webcast? And I'm going to give my answer first, and I know you have some thoughts on this too. Okay. So right now we're kind of doing a webcast. It's live, and later on it's a replay, and I can then take this same webcast and I can upload it to YouTube and have it on my YouTube channel. And then I can also share it on my other Facebook pages. I could use a platform called Tube and the number 2, Gram, Tube to Gram, and cut it down after it's uploaded to my YouTube page and put it on Instagram in 30 to 60 second slices to be a teaser to get people to go to the show. And then the podcast is audio. And so that audio is something that a lot of people will say to me, I listen to things in my car, or I listen to things when I run. So I listen to podcasts more than I do webcasts. basically, in my opinion, Juliana, and Tracy has more to add to this, it's creating content once on multiple and then delivering on multiple platforms. So you can actually have, if you look at Lewis Howes is the best at this, if you can create your podcast and your video at the same exact time, and that creates a multimedia experience. So Tracy, I know you have a little bit more extensive experience on the podcast side versus the website. So you want to add to that?
To be funny, but not so funny. Audio, you don't have to get dressed and put your makeup on.
It's true. Yeah, that is.
But I mean, you did say there are a lot of women entrepreneurs on the call.
Yes.
But in terms of effectiveness, which I will directly, the portability is by far one of the things that is the most advantageous. One of the things that, because podcasts are listened to so frequently in the car through Bluetooth and on smartphones, and in fact, the statistics are like 42% of podcast listeners are listening while they're in their car. Well, you simply can't watch a webcast while you're driving unless you have a driver. So it is very portable, as was radio is very portable, but now because of the ability to do online and download and have a subscription to a podcast, you can take it with you essentially wherever you go. Also, in some cases, it can be a lot more cost efficient because depending on the level of quality of video that you're choosing to engage in for your webcast. And in addition to that too, like when we talk about repurposing for podcast, which is the same strategy and philosophy that you were walking through with the video, but we would say, or I would say, in one of the most effective ways is to look at the podcast as like the hub of your content, and then the spokes that come out from that is that you can have each version transcribed. That turns into the possibility of an ebook. It can be then repurposed social media posts, blog posts, and not that you can't have a webcast transcribed either, but I just think really fundamentally, it comes down to preference. I mean, I'm an audio person and I will do podcasting all day long. Video, I'm more comfortable with it because we've had to become more comfortable with it in this day and age. But for me, it's just great to just, open the mic and then start having a conversation.
Yeah. So, Anna, I'm going to answer your question in just a second. I want to kind of laugh at something Tracy and I laughed at before this a couple months ago, but you just brushed on it. When Tracy said it's easier, podcast is easier because you're not having to get ready for the camera. And both of us come from traditional media backgrounds where everything back in the day had to be so perfectly polished. And, you weren't even allowed to wear your hair in a ponytail. Yeah. And I was telling her about my coming out experience of breaking my old patterns in doing a Facebook Live with my hair in a ponytail one day, which felt so crazy to me because it was like breaking every traditional media rule. But the good news is people want authenticity. And so the good thing about this non-traditional media is that it's people want to see the real you. And if it's, hey, I just came in from the gym because my wellness is a priority and I had 1 hour to do it and it happened to be right before the podcast or the podcast. People appreciate that. So the world isn't expecting as much polishedness anymore as they are expecting authenticity and just being who you really are. And sometimes you go to the gym in the middle of the workday because it's all you can do.
Right. Well, and the same can hold true for podcasting in that it can provide a lot of spontaneity. I mean, we are big advocates for the best quality production that you can afford, but we're also really big advocates about recording where you are. So, for example, if you're at a trade show or if you have the opportunity, we have a client that's they are very successful interior designers and they go to a lot of kitchen and bath shows. They're pretty much at every one of the big large events for interior design, and they have the opportunity now as a podcaster to then be able to take that on the road, and they can do spontaneous interviews with a designer that may be at that show or just another colleague that they don't see because they live across the country. So that portability comes into not only just for the listener's perspective, but also the host perspective as well.
So it also gives you influence, or it gives you a point of influence when you're at an event as well. And this is such an awesome point. I was speaking at the New York Business Expo I speak there every year, but 2 years ago, there was a bunch of guys and their booth was literally like mics coming down, mics in front of them. And they were hosting their podcast and they were grabbing all the speakers right there live. And I was like, guys, this is genius.
Right.
And I was one of the ones that popped on there and I was like, isn't the sound going to be bad? And the way they had the mic set up, the sound was great, but created this energy. And I was like, this is genius. This is like a whole new, I mean, they had a booth, but the booth was really their podcast. And it just created a different energy. And, you know, I was at the Super Bowl last weekend and, you know, being at all these events and parties, it's a great way. I mean, the one show that I told you is a little undercover is all about inspiration and positivity and overcoming mental roadblocks and things like that. So to pop up in the parties, you know, if you're at the Maxim party and you have your podcast going and you're wrangling all the athletes and celebrities there, it makes you an influencer in that space. Just like the interior design women that you were talking about, if they're going to these shows, they are now the influencers that people want to be around. So it gives you a sense of power and validation as your podcast roadshow.
It does. And it really works great for all types of business categories. I've seen a lot of success with people who are self-publishing, for example, because one of the things that we've created in a roadmap strategy is to develop your own book tour. So as the book is released, then the book tour is aligned with locations across cities that are highlighted, and the podcast is then done live from those book signings. So there's all kinds of different ways that you can integrate the live, we call them live tapings, or to your point, the spontaneous interviews behind the scenes. People love behind the scenes. Podcasting is really great for that.
Yeah, it just creates a reason, right?
Right.
So I want to come back to the author thing because it's really important. My publisher's on here too, so I know she has a lot to say about it too. But before I do that, I want to answer Anna's question, and she talked about Lewis Howes because he's such a great example. Is podcast advertising effective? Lewis advertises for 7 minutes at the start of the show, and although it's one of her top 5 podcasts, she fast forward through his advertising all the time. So you came from radio too, you understand this. What are your thoughts on this? And have you seen statistics on conversion in advertising?
Well, so there's a lot of layers to that. So let me just start at the top and just from a view from 10,000 feet, so to speak. And I pulled this right before we started. So in 2015, there was $69 million being spent on podcast advertising. 2017, it's slated to be $220 million. That is a huge increase. One of the reasons that the increase is speculated like it is because Apple as recently as December released in beta analytics where you can actually see if your listeners listen all the way through to your episode, if they skip the ads, or if, and that wasn't available before because it's still such a new platform that people are accessing. The good news is that I think there was a little bit of nervousness around some of these people who drive a lot of this $220 million worth of revenue through their bank accounts is what's going to happen when these stats become available. Well, the stats as they are right now, we're almost 90 days into it, show that if you have engaging content and you have loyal listeners, that they will go through a set of commercials. Okay, so I don't have the stats on how many or how long, but I can personally tell you that 5 to 7 minutes, whether you're in traditional radio or you're podcasting, is just too much. And second of all, and this is again, my opinion, but the most effective thing that you could do would be to take some of those advertising people and give them more non-traditional type of exposure during your show, whether it's a Q&A, like you were saying, Jenny, like interview them, whether you can do a tactical takeaway tip that might involve their product or service. The first 5 to 7 minutes of a podcast are the most critical moments of when you catch your listener and they decide whether or not they're going to listen to the rest of your show. So if the first 5 to 7 minutes are commercials and you're not like Anna, who already knows that they really like this show, but maybe she refers the show to somebody, they go and listen to it, they can't even get through to the show even starting. However, do know that it's working for a lot of the bigger sponsors and the larger advertisers with the huge amount of following. But I do think that's because the huge amount of following that they have, the percentages dropping off don't impact them as much.
Yeah. I feel like when I do listen to it, I just kind of tune it out, quite honestly. Somehow my brain, I listened to it, but I didn't hear it. So I feel like the more you can be integrative in your advertising, the more effective it really could be. That's at least my opinion. It's even like in the beginning of YouTube. If you go on a YouTube and they know what you're watching, they know the genre. So what I do like is at least the advertisements, you only have to run them for like 5 or 10 seconds, but they're usually on par to your likes already. And I do like that. That's really useful. Anna said she totally agrees. 5 to 7 minutes at the beginning is way too long, but if it's given in smaller bites, she could probably handle it. She's just deciding to sponsor some targeted podcasts for her company, which is Love Power Co. or Littles. Did you change the name, Anna? Love Power Littles? So that would be like mindfulness podcast. So Anna, you might want to have a conversation with Tracy directly.
Oh, sure.
So she could give you some advice and
how to negotiate it. Definitely.
That's right. Anna, Tracy can help you negotiate it. And she also, I think, already has some of those analytics. So here's a big question people have. How do you get your podcast on Apple to have it on iTunes? And is that new feature just built in, or is that an additional platform that you layer onto it?
So it's an easy question with a complicated answer, if that makes any sense. And what I mean by that is anyone can get their podcast onto iTunes based on approval, and approval indicates that you've gone through the measures that meets their criteria, which is essentially a technical checklist. The way that you would begin that process is that you would make a decision as to where you wanted your podcast to live on what platform. So, for example, when you have a website and you have it hosted on, let's say, GoDaddy or Bluehost, for example, podcasting is the same. You choose a platform where your podcast lives. The podcast that we recommend the most is a podcast platform called Libsyn, and it's Libsyn. They are based on our research and the research of other podcasters. They are the best to scale for the largest audience, and we always like to start everybody out. Even if you're small, you want to build for growth. There are other platforms. One of the things that we do is we combine 2 platforms, one Libsyn for the fact that they are the best widespread platform, but we also utilize SoundCloud because they have the most aesthetic player. So we use because it's so visually appealing through the SoundCloud player, we use that to integrate on most people's websites. But the iTunes approval process comes as a result of getting your podcast onto one of the platforms. So there are many out there. Libsyn, there's Blueberry, there's SoundCloud. You can really just do research and figure out which one is the best for you. Again, we feel like it's Libsyn. I don't have any affiliate relationship with them or anything. It's just really one of the best ones.
Can you give people, sometimes people just don't know what they don't know. So there's certain criteria that you would probably know that they should be looking for, like, you want something that's easily shareable. You want something that is compatible on Mac and PC. So what are some of the top criteria that you analyze that someone can look into?
Sure. Okay, so for me personally, I'm just going to talk about my own experience as when I was starting my own show. I researched all the platforms for me as an individual, as an entrepreneur, as a host of a podcast. What did I want? At that point in time, which was about 2 years ago, everybody was really strongly advocating SoundCloud, and everybody was saying, you need to be on SoundCloud, you need to be on SoundCloud. And honestly, I think that people were saying that because it was so visually appealing. It was almost like the USA Today version of the podcast platforms, and so it was easier to gravitate to. I was looking for something that was had an intuitive interface, but for me, I also wanted to make sure the 2 most important things to me were how much storage can the platform hold of episode storage in terms of data storage, and then 2, how detailed and how intense and global, local, regional, down to the city of stats will I be able to access. So for me, those 2 things were the most important in terms of access to stats and access to storage for the most cost-effective price. So if I hadn't done my research, I would have just listened to the wave of SoundCloud advocates and not really understood that there are limitations between different platforms. So Libsyn offers you they're a great, their stats are amazing, and they also offer abilities for you to utilize their platform, and then it makes it easy for you to distribute out to other platforms. So for example, if I upload an episode to Libsyn, I can have it send out directly to other platforms. And that was important to me too, because of the ease and simplicity of time management.
So when you say cost, what is an average cost that someone could be expecting to pay if they're just getting started? I know there's different premium levels.
There are. So that was one of the things I think people felt like that was appealing about SoundCloud, is because they do have a free option. But once you do 1 or 2 episodes, you've essentially used up all the data that's available in the free. For Libsyn, you can get, we like to say, when we recommend clients that are launching with us, we like to say to budget anywhere from $75 to $125 a month. I will say that's definitely on the high end, but that's because we also recommend using 2 separate players. So you don't have to do that. So I would say that you can go anywhere from free up to $75, depending on the amount of storage that you need. You probably want to plan on or around anywhere between $45 and $75 a month.
And so you get 1 sponsor, and that covers your cost right there.
Well, the platform itself is usually not the most expensive part of podcasting, but it's definitely probably one of the most important, because one of the things that I didn't say that I want to share is that once you decide on a platform, and this is why I took it so seriously for myself personally in terms of researching it before I even started my podcast production company, is that once you claim your RSS feed, you don't want to switch hosts unless you absolutely have to, because you start building your audience and your followers on your RSS feed, and it can be done, but it's a little trickier. So you want to start out with the platform that you can grow with the most. And that's one of the reasons why, again, that we chose the one that we chose.
So see, that little tiny tip of like those little tips, those little tweaks, like the RSS feed tip, those are some game-changing pieces of advice, and they're just so minute and little that they're questions that someone wouldn't know to ask if they just didn't know what they didn't know. So can you give us 2 or 3 of those other...
Ooh, like behind the scenes?
Yeah, like they're the things that I'm like, wow, when I figure something out, I'm like, that was such a game changer. And I need to tell everybody this little game, like the Tubedogram is just this very simple site to use, but it takes anything off YouTube and cuts down to a 30 to 60 second video for you. And so one of the things that I learned is when you download that onto your hard drive of your phone or your computer, and then you upload it to Facebook or to LinkedIn, and also obviously Instagram, you actually get more views than if you post it directly from YouTube onto Facebook or LinkedIn. Now, the offset is you're not having as many views on your YouTube page, but you're getting way more views if you want to convert in some way, shape, or form on your YouTube, on your Facebook or LinkedIn page. And it's just the way the algorithms work. But when I found that out, I was like, this is one of those little hacks that everybody should know. So do you have a couple hacks that you just know are like game changers besides the RSS feed?
Well, I want to talk, this is an interesting answer, but it's what comes to me first, is the offsetting the audio with your visual aesthetics. Because I did mention the fact that we really recommend 2 players, because I'm all about, based on my background especially, I'm always about branding and continuity and making sure that what people see and hear and experience are all within the same branding experience for the customer, so it literally psychologically makes them feel more comfortable. With iTunes, if you've ever gone on iTunes and just looked at podcasting in general, they're the podcasts are identified by little tiny squares. And one of the things that, there are a couple of things with this that I'll say. One is that you have the option when you upload your podcast, when you're very first launching it, whether to use the same graphic image for every episode or to have a show title and then change your graphics for each episode. So, for example, when you were a guest on our show, we used your headshot in terms of the episode of the Journey to Their show itself. The images have to be 3,000 by 3,000. That's one just little thing that you need to know when you're going into it. We utilize and recommend the program Canva. It's gotten a lot of excitement. It's probably, you may already know that it exists and that it's great, but if you don't, go to canva.com. You can get the paid membership so you can actually brand it with your own colors and your own logos. It'll let you use your own typefaces, which I'm I'm OCD about. But then licensed images are also something that you have to be really careful about and pay attention to. And so there's a website called unsplash.com that has gorgeous royalty-free images so that you can cost effectively continue the visual aspect of your brand with the quality of the production of your podcast. Because if you're investing in quality production, you absolutely want the production to match the visuals and the visuals to match the quality of the production. And shoot, I had an audio one too that reminded me of that. I'll come back to it in just a second, that had to do with with licensing. So also, as tempting as it might be to throw, a song into your podcast, or to use a song, Taking Care of Business, for example, just came through my mind, to use that music as an opening to your entrepreneur-oriented podcast. Do not do it, because it will, it can cost you fines, but also it will keep you from being accepted onto platforms like iHeart. SiriusXM has a podcast platform now called Spoke, and Spotify is now doing podcasts, and Pandora is about to launch them. And if you have any unlicensed, if you have music that's in your show that's not licensed, you will not be approved to run. So
yeah,
that's a lot of different hacks, but hopefully you followed that.
Well, I love hacks. Hacks are my favorite because they're one of those things, like, we could theoretically talk about the big picture stuff all day long, but it's when you actually get down and dirty and into things that you're like, okay, wait, I'm supposed to do this, but I'm not actually sure how to do this or why I'm doing this, or tons of people probably use the music and get caught up. I was actually trying to take my own TED Talk and download it onto my hard drive from YouTube to upload it on my page, and it wouldn't let me do it. Like, they're really cracking down. And it's funny because I'm like, that's me. It's my talk. But technically, they own it because they produced the event. And so they're really, really cutting down on it, or I should say cracking down on. I don't know what algorithms are working in all of their favors.
It's happening with websites too. I've had three clients in 2017 that got fined by Getty Images for using images on their site that weren't licensed. That's a lot for 3 in 1 year for one business development consultant. That's a lot. So But I think there is a lot more of an effort to minimize that now.
Yeah. So going back to publishing real fast. So if you're an author, going to be an author, or even like Anna, who's launching a product, and we're talking about utilizing the podcast as like a pop-up experience at events that gives you this sense of authority and credibility. And so I say, and this is always my, what can we do to create experiences to transform as the world's transforming, transforming our brand execution. But, these pop-up stores, so my business partners are pioneers in pop-up world. So I love the whole pop-up psychology, but a store where you just walk in and it's all this, so it's a bookstore, but it's all of these authors, and they're all doing their podcasts, and they're being interviewed in other people's podcasts, and it just, every day new authors are there. And so you were talking about some of the behind the scenes things too. I know that you've seen this podcast platform be critical for the branding for authors.
Well, I think that you can take that same philosophy, like, creating your own book tour for your own book release. You can also take a look at, if you have the event management, or you can align with an event management person, you could really create some interesting podcast opportunities. Because let's say, for example, that you were launching a handbag line and it was a great bag for travel, let's just say, for example, then you could create events in the stores that, like, for example, if it was a new store that was going to be carrying your bag, so to speak, then you could do a live taping from that store. You could also create an entire combination of, maybe there's an author who's writing a book around best travel tips for single females, and then you can collaborate with the author, and you have bags that go along, and the publisher of the book has events, and you basically strategically partner with people that are in the same genre, but not necessarily the same exact business in terms of competitiveness. So you could have, the handbag line, the book events. You could also bring in any of, whether it's like a Kind bar or another whole wellness snack type person that, goes in the bag while you travel. And I'm literally making this up as we're going along, but it's just an example of multi-tiered collaborations where everybody wins at that point. And maybe one sponsor like Kind bar underwrites the whole event experience, and you go into 3 or 4 different cities, or perhaps you just do one event in your own backyard. But it's very flexible and gives everybody cross-promotion opportunities.
You talked about a really important strategy for authors or people who have product lines. Buyers, stores, retail, hard good retail, they need experiences now. So if you're offering to have this live podcast where potentially customers are even getting on and there's this energy, they want that. Now, you might not try and pitch that when you're brand new with your podcast and you only have a small following, but as your following grows, it's definitely a useful strategy to bring to the table, because I know, in working with buyers all the time, that they are dying for experiences and energy and buzz, and something that brings people in off the street, and something that brings people in from other people's databases is really important to them too. So I noticed we only have a few minutes left. I would love if we could share some marketing strategies that we maybe haven't talked about. We've definitely thrown some in our conversation, but what are maybe your top 2 or 3 key marketing strategies that you think everyone, or at least most people, should absolutely be implementing without giving too much away, because this is your secret sauce too. This is your business as well.
But it's all about reciprocity. I mean, no problem. Well, we've hit on a lot, but maybe I want to drill down a little bit more on, for example, the whole efficiency of the repurposing aspect. Like, what does that look like in terms of you come to the podcast with a show outline, for example, and the show outline is going to tell you or give you the guideline of what it is that you're going to talk about on the show. So that's your outline. And so then you're going to do your show, and not everything that comes up on your outline is going to end up on your show, because that's just the nature of how it's going to be. So afterwards, you would take that show outline and you would convert it into what's called show notes. Show notes show up on your website where your podcast is archived, which we didn't really talk about that, but you also always want to have your own podcast episodes archived on your own website, and that helps you tremendously in search. People searching for business categories can ultimately land on any episodes that happen to be about that business category, and just helps optimize your own site as well. So then you've taken the outline, you've created the show, you have the audio, you have the show notes, then you can get that transcribed. the transcription, then you can extract social media posts out of that, use those for posting on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. Do not underestimate the power of LinkedIn for podcast audience growth. I think every one of my clients has been pleasantly surprised they didn't really leverage LinkedIn prior to launching a podcast, but it's been a huge advantage for them.
And for 1 second, Tracy, I'm sorry. LinkedIn has become, to me, and it was not my favorite platform. Facebook was my favorite, and I would do some things on it. LinkedIn for me recently changed, but it used to be that it was like an oh by the way kind of thing. I just posted a video there the other day. I posted the same one on Facebook as well. I actually have more followers between all my platforms on Facebook. LinkedIn, I probably have like maybe 12,000. I uploaded this video, and within just a few days, there's over 30,000 views on it. And I would have expected something like that on Facebook, but I did not expect that on LinkedIn. And people have been talking about it. Influencers that I know are connected to the LinkedIn executives have been talking about these algorithm changes that were going to happen. So this new organic reach was going to happen. Of those 30,000, many of them are not they're not my friends. They're not my LinkedIn circle. But that video kept spreading out and getting all these views, and it was just, I was blown away. So I'm in agreement, and I wanted to just like hit home that fact that do not underestimate LinkedIn, because it has become a really powerful platform for still professionally speaking, but it's gotten a little less staunchy, I think, and a little bit more. The one video I'm talking about was the like craziest play in the Super Bowl by Nick Foles when he ran in for a touchdown, but I made it professional by putting the caption was, this is the epitome of my life mantra: have more fear of regret than failure. History is never made by playing it safe. So I turned something that was very social into something professional, and it was just really amazing. So I agree with you, and I didn't want to interrupt, but I wanted to like hit home on that fact. But you were on a roll. Go for it.
Well, and just to give more into little snack size tips, I think, because once you get to that place where you have all of the content and everything to repurpose it, that's pretty self-explanatory. So I'll use the rest of the time that we have to say that one thing that you want to make sure of is when you go into committing to launch a podcast, that consistency is the best thing that you can do for success. So we've talked a lot about where you can be interactive, where you can develop partnerships, where you can advertise, where you can put your message and have your voice heard. But you have to do it consistently, because your tribe of listeners and followers get used to knowing that you release your episode Wednesdays at 10 a.m. And so they show up for that, even though it is an on-demand type situation. The podcasts that release consistently are the ones that have the more evangelist, and they have more engaged audiences for the long run. And that's one thing for sure. And then the second thing is, don't underestimate the power of the content that you've produced, in that, so for example, if you do a podcast for 1 year and you do one a week, that's 52 weeks of episodes, but not everybody was listening the first 13 weeks, let's say. So don't be hesitant to bring those back around and repurpose them and utilize the Throwback Thursday or, Follow Me Friday, and create opportunities to reuse even just those same audio episodes, especially if, for let's say, one happened to do about fear and failure, and that was a big topic with the Super Bowl, then you can re-release your own episode with those types of taglines and get the maximum investment on all of the content that you've put all that energy and resource into.
And I think it's also important to recircle back the person that you had, the guest that you had on, into that, so they could re-promote it as well. Because I know a lot of the people that are engaged, and the algorithms keep changing in social media, but I feel like some people that used to be engaged with me before aren't really seeing things that I'm posting anymore, but other people are. Right. And so it's like I have a whole new audience, I feel, from this time last year. So it's kind of like also on Facebook when it's like this time last year, and you post something back up. I pull things back up from the past all the time, because who's seeing it now, and not the same people that were seeing it before. So But I think bringing your guests back into the conversation is really important, because they could then take that as an opportunity to share it as brand new content as well. If it's new listeners. So, well, I am so grateful for all of your advice. You, I know, are so passionate about this. You live, sleep, eat, breathe this.
I don't still have it under my pillow anymore.
But it is in your cellular level.
It is.
I'm going to ask you one last question, because this is a question people talk to me about all the time. Okay. And I know we're not going to we didn't focus on like the product, the technical product to use, the electronics, so to speak, throughout this podcast. But do you or do you not need a special expensive microphone to have your own podcast?
Oh my goodness. Well, there is no easy answer to that question. It is all dependent upon so many different factors. And the factors are, where is the space that you're going to be broadcasting from? Are you going to be broadcasting with having a guest on the phone or in person? Are you going to have a co-host, or is it just going to be you? If you have a co-host, does that co-host live in another city? So you can see that this is not variable. But what I can say is that invest in the best equipment that you can afford, because the better quality broadcast that you can put out there, the more likely it will rise to the top of not only just the competitiveness in your business category, but in general, because the space is not saturated in any way, shape, or form at this point, but it will ultimately become more crowded, and you want to have your podcast sound the best that it can possibly sound, so it doesn't hurt people's ears hurt to listen to. So just invest in the most expensive and in what you can afford.
Great advice. My one girlfriend, she lived in New York City, and she would do her podcast. I don't know if she still does this, but she would do her podcast out of her closet because, in New York City, it's so loud and there are sirens going by. So that was like her soundproof room. And then she had the special microphone to drown out as much outside noise as possible. But it was funny because when we did the podcast, it was through video, so I could see her. She didn't broadcast the video, but I could see her, and I'm like, "Are you in your closet?" She's like, "Yeah, just expensive microphone." So it was hilarious. But anyway, I want to thank you so much again for your time, your knowledge. Please reach out to Tracy if you have more questions.
Yes, definitely.
Anything. Her company, literally, if it seems all too overwhelming for you and too many variables, her company takes all the guesswork out of that for you and just does it all for you, which I'm that kind of person where I'm like, I get what I want to do, but I want to do all the stuff to do it. So can you just do all the stuff to do it?
Yeah, full service turnkey. But we also really help you make sure that it fits into your lifestyle too, which we didn't talk a lot about, but it's really important. We want it to be fun. If you're not having fun, you don't want to show up to do it. So we take real good care to make sure that it integrates into your lifestyle. So, and thank you so much. It's great to see you.
It's good to see your face too. I haven't seen you in a little bit. So, well, thanks everyone for listening, joining in, giving your feedback, asking your questions. And one last thing is Kim asked me to post the platform in the comment section. It's Libsyn, L-Y-B.
Libsyn, Libsyn.com.
I knew there was a Y in there. Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.